The digital clock on my monitor finally clicked over to 9:47 p.m. That was it. I was done. I hit save one last time, the click of the mouse echoing in the dead quiet of the office, and leaned back in my chair. The groan from my spine was louder. It had been one of those days, you know? The kind where every email is flagged urgent, every minor task unravels into a complex problem, and the coffee tastes like disappointment. I was the last one left on our floor, a ghost haunting a landscape of dark monitors and empty cubicles. The only other sign of life was the low, steady hum of the server room down the hall, a mechanical beast that never slept. My commute home was a blur of smeared streetlights through the back of a taxi. The city was still buzzing, a hive of activity I felt completely disconnected from. I just wanted my apartment. I wanted the familiar comfort of my own space, a microwaved dinner that would taste vaguely of cardboard, and the sweet oblivion of falling asleep with the TV still on. The building I live in, the Meridian, is one of those new, sleek high-rises that are popping up all over the city. Glass, steel, and a sense of aggressive modernity. The security is top-notch, which was a big selling point for me. Key fobs for every door, a concierge in the lobby 24/7, and cameras watching everything. It felt safe. It felt sterile. Most nights, that was a comfort. But tonight, something felt off the moment I stepped out of the cab. The air was still and heavy. The usual doorman, a friendly guy named Sal who always had a comment about the weather, wasn't at his post. His little wooden stool was empty. I figured he was probably just in the back or on his break. Still, his absence made the lobby feel vast and empty. The lobby of the Meridian is designed to impress. Soaring ceiling, polished marble floors, and soft, recessed lighting that makes everything glow with a warm, expensive yellow. Usually, even this late, you'd see a few other residents, a couple walking their dog, someone coming back from a late dinner. Tonight, there was no one. The only sound was the soft scuff of my own dress shoes on the marble, each step sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a place that's supposed to be full of life but isn't. It was heavy. I walked towards the bank of elevators, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, its weight a familiar ache. I pressed the up button. The plastic ring around it lit up, and a moment later, a soft ding announced the arrival of a car. The stainless steel doors slid open with a smooth, expensive hiss. I stepped inside. The interior was all brushed steel and a large, full-length mirror. I caught a glimpse of myself, suit a little rumpled, dark circles under my eyes, hair looking like I'd been running my hands through it all day, which I had. I looked like every other drained office worker in the city. I turned away from my reflection and pressed the button for my floor. 15. The doors slid shut, sealing me inside the small metal box. The soft, synthesized music started playing, some generic, calming instrumental track I'd heard 1,000 times but could never name. The elevator began its ascent, a gentle, almost imperceptible motion. The numbers on the digital display above the door lit up in sequence. 2, 3, 4. It's probably a good time to mention the thing about my building. It's one of those buildings. The ones built by people who are just a little bit superstitious. There's no 13th floor. The button panel in the elevator is a perfect, uninterrupted grid of squares, except for one spot. It goes from 11, 12, and then jumps straight to 14. In the space where the 13 should be, there's just a smooth, blank, black plastic insert. It was a running joke among the residents. We'd all talk about it. Guess they keep the ghosts on 13, someone would quip while waiting for the elevator. Once, some kids from the 20th floor had used a marker to draw a 13 on the blank spot, and it had stayed there for a week before maintenance scrubbed it off. It was a funny little quirk, a conversation starter, a harmless superstition, but standing there alone, in the dead quiet, with the sterile music humming and the numbers climbing, it felt a little less funny. My tired brain started to wander. What was actually there, between the ceiling of the 12th floor and the floorboards of the 14th? The official story was that it was a technical floor, housing extra structural supports and wiring conduits. It was sealed off, inaccessible, but in the late-night quiet, your mind plays tricks on you. 7, 8, 9. The ascent was smooth as always. I shifted the weight of my laptop bag on my shoulder. I was so close to home. Just a few more floors. I could already feel the relief of kicking off my shoes, of peeling off this suit that felt like a cage. 10, 11, the light for 11 glowed briefly, then faded. I watched the display, waiting for it to jump to 14. 12. The number lit up, and then it happened. It wasn't a gentle stop. It was a lurch, a sudden, mechanical shudder that ran through the entire car, making me stumble forward a step. The floor beneath my feet vibrated violently for a second, accompanied by a horrible grinding sound from somewhere above, like giant metal teeth chewing on rocks. Then, total silence. The elevator stopped. The synthesized music cut out mid-note. The low hum of the motor vanished. Even the ventilation seemed to die. The world was suddenly, completely, devoid of sound. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart in my ears and the sound of my own breath, sharp and ragged. The lights inside the car flickered once, twice, then went out completely. I was plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. It only lasted for a second, but it felt like an eternity. My hand flew out, fumbling against the cold steel wall, trying to find the control panel. Just as my fingers brushed against the buttons, the lights came back on. But they were different. They were dimmer, casting a weak, sickly yellow glow that made the pristine elevator look grimy and old. I stood there frozen, my heart a jackhammer against my ribs, staring at the number on the display. It was still lit. 12. We were stuck between the 12th and 14th floors. My first thought was practical. Great, just what I needed. I reached for the alarm button, the one with the little bell icon. My finger hovered over it, but before I could press it, another sound cut through the silence. It wasn't the alarm. It wasn't the hum of the resuming motor. It was a beep. Just one. It was a dry, digital sound, like something from an old computer in the 80s. It was short, sharp, and utterly alien. It didn't sound like any of the normal chimes or dings this brand new, state-of-the-art elevator was supposed to make. It came from the control panel itself, and it was a sound I had never, ever heard before. It was the sound of something waking up. That beep. I need you to understand what that sound did to me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't scary in the way a scream is scary. It was just wrong. It was a sound that didn't belong. In that perfectly engineered, silent metal box, that one, single, digital beep was like a crack appearing in the fabric of reality. My breath hitched in my throat. My eyes were glued to the control panel, trying to figure out what had made the noise. My brain was cycling through 1,000 rational explanations. A short circuit, a system reboot, a diagnostic test I'd never heard before. It had to be something normal. It had to be, and then I saw it. In the spot where the button for the 13th floor was supposed to be. The spot that was just a blank, smooth, black piece of plastic, a dummy plate, light came on. It wasn't a soft, friendly glow like the other buttons. It was a fierce, insistent, blood-red light. It pulsed once, a deep, angry crimson, and then stayed on, burning a hole in the dim, sickly yellow of the elevator. I just stared at it. I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was impossible. There was no button there. I had looked at that panel 100 times. I had touched it. It was a solid piece of plastic. There were no electronics behind it, no bulb, no wiring. There couldn't be. My mind refused to accept it. I thought, maybe I'm more tired than I thought. Maybe this is a hallucination. Maybe I fell asleep standing up after that nightmare of a day at work. But the red light was real. It was casting a faint, demonic glow on my hand, which was still hovering in the air. Time seemed to slow down. The silence in the car was so absolute it was like a pressure on my eardrums. And in that total silence, another sound started. A low groan. It came from the doors. It wasn't the smooth, oiled hiss of them opening. It was a reluctant, grinding sound, like ancient gears being forced to turn after decades of rust. The sound of stone scraping against stone. The perfectly aligned stainless steel doors, which usually slid apart in a seamless whisper, began to part with an agonizing slowness. A tiny crack of darkness appeared between them, and with it came a gust of air. It was cold, not the conditioned cool of the building, but a deep, damp, cellar cold. And the smell, my God, the smell. It hit me like a physical blow. It was the smell of a wet, unfinished basement. The chalky, earthy scent of raw concrete, the sharp tang of lime and mortar, and underneath it all, a thick, cloying odor of dampness and decay. The smell of a place that had been sealed off from the sun and air for a very, very long time. My paralysis broke. This wasn't a hallucination. This was happening. The doors continued their slow, tortured crawl open, revealing the world beyond. And it wasn't a floor. It wasn't a lobby. It wasn't an apartment hallway. It was exactly what the smell promised. A raw, unfinished corridor. The floor was bare, pockmarked concrete, covered in a thick layer of pale dust that swirled in the draft from the elevator. The walls were cinder blocks, gray and uneven, with splotches of darker dampness spreading across them like a disease. There were no light fixtures, no carpet, no wallpaper, no sign that this place belonged in a luxury high-rise. Dangling from the low ceiling were loose bundles of electrical wires, their colored plastic casings a jarring splash of modernity in this otherwise primitive space. The only source of light was a single, bare bulb hanging from a long, grimy cord about 30 feet down the corridor. It was one of those construction site work lights in a wire cage, and it was flickering, buzzing erratically. On, off, on, off. Each time it flashed, it threw a series of long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed on the walls like something alive. It made the entire hallway seem to twitch. I stood there, half in and half out of the sterile, steel world of the elevator, staring into this tomb. This was the 13th floor, the place that didn't exist. This was what was hidden behind the drywall and the marble. A concrete skeleton, the doors groaned to a complete stop, fully open. The red 13 on the panel continued to burn. For a second, a stupid, morbid curiosity took hold. I leaned forward slightly, peering into the flickering gloom. Was this really just a technical floor? It looked like they just stopped building it, like the workers had walked off the job halfway through and never came back. Then, a wave of pure, cold terror washed over me, chasing away any hint of curiosity. What was I doing? I was in an elevator that had stopped at a floor that didn't exist. This wasn't an adventure. This was a nightmare. No, no way. I whispered it out loud to myself, my voice sounding small and thin in the oppressive space. My hand, which felt like it was moving through molasses, shot out to the control panel. My thumb slammed down on the close door button. I hammered it, once, twice, 5, 10 times. My palm was slick with sweat. Nothing. The doors remained wide open. The button didn't even click. It was dead. The entire panel was dead, except for that one, single, glowing red 13. Panic, true panic, began to bubble up from my stomach, hot and acidic. I started hitting other buttons at random. 15, my floor. 1, the lobby. The alarm button with the little bell icon. I mashed them all, my movements getting frantic, clumsy. There was no response, no chime, no alarm, no lurch of movement. The elevator was a dead metal box, its doors yawning open into this forgotten, dark place. The machine had brought me here, and now it was refusing to take me away. It was holding me here, forcing me to look. I felt trapped. A primal fear, the kind you feel when you're cornered, seized me. I backed away from the doors, pressing myself into the far corner of the elevator, as far away from the dark hallway as I could get. The full-length mirror on the back wall showed a terrifying sight. A pale, wide-eyed man in a rumpled suit, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, with the flickering, monstrous hallway gaping open behind him like the mouth of some great beast. My heart was a drum solo in my chest. Thump, 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 thump. My breathing was loud and ragged. I was trying to think, trying to force my brain to work. Call for help. My phone. I fumbled in my pocket for my cell, my fingers clumsy and shaking. I pulled it out. The screen lit up, a small island of comforting, normal light. I looked down at the top left corner. No service. Of course there was no service in a concrete bunker hidden between floors. A choked, desperate laugh almost escaped my lips. I stood there, clutching my dead phone, pressed into the corner, staring out into the darkness. The only sounds were my own ragged breathing and the incessant, maddening bzzz of that faulty work light down the hall. Everything else was silent, a deep, profound, waiting silence. It felt like the whole building was holding its breath. And then, another sound joined the chorus. It came from the far end of the hallway, from the deep shadows beyond the flickering bulb. It was faint at first. So faint I thought I was imagining it. A scrape, then a pause, another scrape. It was a slow, rhythmic sound. It wasn't the sound of a footstep. It was heavier. It was a drag, the sound of something heavy and rough being pulled across the dusty concrete floor. Scrape, a 2-second pause. Scrape, my blood ran cold. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I stopped breathing. I was listening with an intensity that hurt. It wasn't the building settling. It wasn't a pipe. It was deliberate, rhythmic, and it was getting closer. Scrape. It was louder now, sharper. It was the sound of something made of metal. A shovel, maybe, or a pipe, being dragged, inch by painful inch, through the darkness. Scrape. My eyes were locked on the far end of the corridor, trying to pierce the gloom past the sputtering light. The sound was coming from back there, from the pitch-black void. Whatever was making that sound was still hidden in the shadows. But it was moving toward me, toward the open elevator doors, toward the light. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. You know that feeling, when every single sound in the world fades away except for the one thing you don't want to hear? That was it. That scraping noise was everything. It wasn't my imagination. It was real, it was rhythmic, and it was getting closer. My whole body was one big, tense nerve ending, coiled in that corner, my back pressed so hard against the mirrored wall I half expected to phase right through it. Scrape, louder now. It was under the flickering work light. Scrape, and then a shape began to resolve itself out of the deep, inky blackness at the far end of the hall. It was a person, a silhouette, at first, jerky and unnatural under the strobe-like effect of the failing bulb. On, a man. Off, darkness. On, a man a step closer. Off, darkness. It was like watching a stop-motion horror film, and I was the only one in the audience. He stepped fully into the weak, buzzing circle of light, and I could finally see him. And honestly, for a split second, a tiny, stupid part of my brain felt a sliver of relief. He was wearing a uniform. A maintenance uniform, a gray jumpsuit, the kind the building staff wore. He worked here. Okay, I thought, my brain desperately trying to build a ladder out of this pit of fear. He's just a maintenance guy, working late. Weird, but not impossible. But the relief evaporated as quickly as it came. The uniform was filthy, stained with something dark and smeared with what looked like grease and grime. It hung off his large frame, rumpled and ill-fitting. He walked with a heavy, shuffling gait, his shoulders hunched forward. He wasn't just walking, he was pulling something. It was a bag, a long, heavy-duty canvas bag, the kind you'd see used for laundry or military gear. It was a dull, indeterminate color, maybe olive green or a faded tan, now mostly obscured by dirt. It was full, not just full, but bulging in a way that was lumpy and unnatural. And he was dragging it behind him by a single strap. The sound, that god-awful scraping sound, wasn't coming from his feet. It was coming from the bag. Or, more specifically, from something inside the bag that was heavy and metallic and bumping along the raw concrete floor with every step he took. Scrape, the bag caught on a rough patch of floor. He tugged, his whole body lurching with the effort. Scrape, it moved again. The worst part, the part that really started to short-circuit my ability to think, was that he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at the elevator, this bright, stainless steel box standing wide open in the middle of his dark, forgotten corridor. His head was down, his gaze fixed on the floor a few feet in front of him, as if the only things that existed in his entire universe were his own 2 feet and the terrible weight of the bag he was pulling. It was like I wasn't even there. I was a ghost. He was so completely absorbed in his task that I might as well have been invisible. That was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been running at me with a knife. This wasn't about me. I had just stumbled into, whatever this was, a routine, his routine. As he got closer, moving out of the direct flicker of the overhead light and into the dimmer space between it and me, I saw the trail he was leaving. It wasn't just a disturbance in the dust. The bag was leaving a thin, dark, wet line on the concrete. It glistened faintly in the ambient light from the elevator car. My mind flashed through possibilities. A leaking pipe he was transporting? A bag full of wet, greasy rags? Each explanation felt thin, a lie I was telling myself. The smell of damp concrete and mold was now mixing with something else. Something coppery and thick, the smell of a butcher shop. He was 20 feet away. My paralysis finally broke, shattered by a jolt of pure adrenaline. My brain screamed one word, alarm. I lunged from my corner, my hand slapping against the control panel. I found the button with the little bell icon, the emergency alarm I'd never had a reason to even look at twice before. My thumb mashed down on it. Nothing, no sound, no ringing in some far-off security office. Just a dead, unresponsive piece of plastic. No, come on, I whispered, my voice a ragged, breathless thing. I hit it again, this time with the heel of my hand. I hammered it, over and over, mixing in the lobby button and my own floor, 15, for good measure. My frantic pounding was the only sound in the elevator, a hollow, pathetic drumming against the backdrop of that relentless scraping from the hall. The panel was a brick. The only light still lit was that hellish, blood-red 13. The machine was dead. It had served its purpose. It had delivered me. Scrape. He was 10 feet away. I could see the details of his face now in the yellow light spilling from the car. It was a blank, empty face. His skin was pale and waxy. His eyes were dull, unfocused. He had a few days' worth of stubble on his chin. He looked less like a man and more like a mannequin, animated by some unseen force. He just kept coming, his focus absolute. Shuffle, tug, scrape. Shuffle, tug, scrape. The wet track on the floor was darker now, thicker. The metallic smell was nauseating. I scrambled back again, pressing myself into the corner, trying to make myself smaller, trying to will myself out of existence. My eyes were wide, darting between the impassive man and the open doorway, my only path of escape, a path that led directly toward him and into that flickering, monster-filled darkness. There was no way out. No way. And then, a miracle. With a low groan, the sound of grinding metal I'd heard before, the elevator doors began to move. They were closing, slowly, agonizingly, but they were closing. I didn't dare breathe. I just watched the gap of darkness shrink. The man was right at the threshold now, so close I could smell the stale sweat and grime coming off of him. But he still didn't look up. He didn't seem to notice or care that his world was about to be sealed off. He just took another shuffling step. Scrape. The doors were halfway shut. The horrible scraping sound was cut off. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made my knees buckle washed over me. It was going to be okay. The elevator had woken up. It was saving me. The gap narrowed. A foot. 6 inches. The man's shoulder was almost touching the leading edge of the closing door. He didn't flinch. 3 inches. 2. I could see a sliver of his dirty gray uniform. 1 inch. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for an eternity. I was safe. Then a hand shot through the gap. It wasn't fast or violent. It just appeared, a thick, grease-stained hand, with cracked knuckles and black dirt caked under every fingernail. It pressed flat against the cool steel of the door. There was no struggle, no sound of straining muscles. The doors, which had been closing with the inexorable force of 1,000 pounds of machinery, just stopped. And then, with that same, placid, effortless calm, he pushed. The doors slid back open with a smooth, oiled hiss. The same sound they made 100 times a day. The sound of normal, but this wasn't normal. He had pushed them open like they were shower curtains. The hand retracted, and for the first time, he lifted his head. He looked right at me. There was nothing behind his eyes. No anger, no malice, no recognition. It was like looking at 2 black stones. His face was a mask of utter indifference. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was just a shape. A simple, horrifying acknowledgement of my presence, now that he could no longer ignore it. The moment stretched into an eternity. Me, frozen in the corner. Him, standing in the doorway, a silent, hulking figure holding the strap of his heavy, dripping bag. The buzzing of the work light down the hall seemed to grow louder, filling the dead air. I was trapped, not by a machine anymore. I was trapped by him. The game was over. He knew I was here, and now he was going to do something about it. The worst part about that moment wasn't the strength. I mean, don't get me wrong, the strength was impossible. A man pushing open a commercial elevator door like it was made of cardboard is something that just doesn't compute in your brain. You see it, but you don't believe it. Your mind keeps trying to find an explanation. The hydraulics failed, the safety mechanism disengaged. Anything other than the simple, terrifying truth in front of you. He was just that strong. But no, the worst part wasn't the strength. It was how he looked at me after he did it. He lifted his head, slowly, like it was heavy, and his eyes found mine. I've seen angry eyes before. I've seen sad eyes, happy eyes, tired eyes. I've never seen eyes like his. They were just off. Like looking at 2 camera lenses that weren't recording anything. There was no flicker of emotion in them. No malice, no curiosity, not even annoyance that I was in his way. It was a profound, bottomless indifference, the kind of look you might give a rock on the sidewalk or a crack in the pavement. I was an object, an obstacle that had briefly required a minor physical exertion, an exertion that was now complete. My terror, my very existence, didn't even register enough to be worthy of a response. I wasn't a person to him. I was just there. And then he smiled. It's hard to even call it a smile. My brain calls it that because the corners of his mouth turned up, but it was a purely mechanical gesture. An insect twitching an antenna. There was no warmth, no humor, not even cruelty in it. It was the smile of a mask, a flexing of muscles that meant nothing. It was the most horrifying expression I have ever seen on a human face, because it felt completely inhuman. It was an acknowledgement, a signal that my period of being ignored was over. Now, he saw me, and he was going to proceed. He didn't say a word. The silence was absolute now, thick and heavy like a blanket. The buzzing light from the hell hallway seemed miles away. He took a shuffling step forward, clearing the threshold and entering the elevator car. And he dragged that awful, heavy bag in with him. The sound changed. Out in the hall, it was a dry, gritty scrape on concrete. In here, on the polished metal floor of the car, the bag landed with a soft, wet thud. A sickening, fleshy sound. He pulled it the rest of the way in, lugging it into the corner opposite me. It took up a huge amount of space, bulging obscenely. The canvas was dark with moisture, and as it settled, a small, dark puddle began to form around its base on the floor. The smell hit me like a physical blow. Before, it had been mixed with the scent of old concrete and dust. In here, in this small, enclosed steel box, it was concentrated, overpowering. It was a complex, layered stench of decay. There was the coppery, metallic tang I'd smelled before, but now it was mixed with something else. The sour smell of old, wet fabric, the musty odor of a damp basement, and underneath it all, a faint, sickly sweetness. The smell of meat that had been left out too long. It clung to the air, to the walls, to him. It filled my nose and coated the back of my throat. I gagged, a dry, choked sound, and slapped a hand over my mouth and nose. His eyes, those dead, empty camera lenses, tracked my small movement. The faint, mechanical smile remained fixed on his face. He straightened up, his back to the wall, directly across from me. We were maybe 5 feet apart. The elevator, which had always felt spacious enough for 4 or 5 people, now felt like a coffin. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, and with him and that monstrous bag in here, there was no room. No room to move, no room to breathe, no room to think. The doors were still wide open behind him, a gateway back to the flickering nightmare of the 13th floor, but he was standing right in the way. There was no escape. My mind, which had been a screaming mess of static and panic, started grasping for straws. You know how it is. You try to build a logical narrative, even when everything is illogical. Maybe he just needs to use the elevator? A maintenance guy working on a sealed-off floor, and the only working elevator just happened to be the one I was in. It was a stupid, insane thought, but it was better than the alternative. So I did something even stupider. I spoke. My voice came out as a ragged croak. You need to go up? Or down? He didn't answer. He didn't even seem to hear me. He just stood there, breathing. I could hear his breath now. It wasn't labored, just slow and steady. In and out, a placid rhythm that was completely at odds with the pounding chaos inside my own chest. My heart was a trapped bird, beating itself to death against my ribs. I tried again, my voice a little louder, a little more desperate. Look, man, I don't know what's going on, just let me out. Okay, you can have the elevator. Nothing, the blank stare, the empty smile, the slow, rhythmic breathing. It was then that I truly understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a confrontation. To him, this wasn't a thing that was happening. This was just the next step in his process. I had stumbled into the middle of his routine, and now I was part of it. He wasn't negotiating. He wasn't threatening. He was simply continuing. My eyes darted around the small space, looking for anything. The emergency phone was behind a little metal plate. Even if I could get to it, what would I say? Hello? I'm trapped in an elevator on a floor that doesn't exist with a guy who smells like death. They'd think it was a prank call. The control panel was still dead, except for that single, glowing, blood-red 13. A monument to my fate. My gaze fell on the bag in the corner. That long, lumpy, horribly shaped bag. The wet spot beneath it was bigger now, a dark, greasy smear on the steel. One end of it was cinched tight with a rope, but the other end had a shape to it. A rounded shape, covered in canvas but undeniably, horribly familiar. My stomach churned, and for a second I thought I was going to be sick right there. Don't look at the bag, I told myself. Look at him, you have to watch him. So I did. I stared at him, my back pressed so hard into the corner I was trying to merge with the metal. We stood there in that suffocating, silent, stinking box for what felt like an hour. It was probably 10 seconds. Time had just stopped working properly. It was just me and him, and the awful thing in the bag, suspended in a pocket of reality that didn't obey any rules. Then, he moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion. Not sudden, not aggressive. He simply, calmly, brought his right hand up. I watched it, mesmerized. It was a thick hand, the fingernails black with grime, the knuckles chapped and raw. He didn't reach for me. He reached toward his own waist. He wore a heavy leather tool belt. It was old and cracked, stained with the same grease and filth as his jumpsuit. Hanging from it were loops for hammers, screwdrivers, wrenches. The standard gear for a maintenance guy. His fingers, slow and methodical, brushed against the worn leather. They moved past a loop where a hammer might have hung. They slid past a sheath that might have held a box cutter. His fingers were searching, feeling for something specific. My blood ran cold. It was a coldness that started in my feet and shot up my spine, a wave of pure, distilled ice. This was it. The passivity was over. The waiting was over. He was going to pull something out of that belt. A wrench, a screwdriver, a knife. He was going to use a tool. And I was the job he was about to start. The world narrowed to that single, slow-moving hand. His dirty fingers finding their purchase. The slight creak of old leather as his hand closed around the handle of whatever he was about to pull free. They say it's fight or flight. It's an expression you hear all the time, a neat little biological package for something you can't possibly understand until it's happening to you. In that moment, watching his grimy hand close around the handle of some unseen tool, I learned that fight or flight isn't a choice. It isn't a conscious decision made in your prefrontal cortex. It's a takeover. It's a hostile coup staged by some ancient, animal part of your brain that's been dormant your whole life. My brain, the part that forms sentences and worries about deadlines and remembers to pay the rent, had completely short-circuited. It was gone. Something else was in the driver's seat. This new driver didn't see a man. It saw a threat. It didn't see a tool belt. It saw a weapon. And it didn't see a steel box with no escape. It saw a corner. My body was already moving before I knew what I was doing. There was no plan. There was only a single, blinding impulse. The strap of my laptop bag was still slung over my shoulder, digging into my clavicle. It was heavy, a solid-state drive, a metal chassis, a power brick. 3, maybe 4 pounds of dense, unforgiving electronics. It was the only thing I had. I remember the scrape of my dress shoes on the floor as I pivoted, putting all my weight, all 175 pounds of terrified office worker, into it. The bag swung in a wide, clumsy arc. It wasn't a graceful move. It wasn't a movie hero moment. It was an awkward, desperate flail. I wasn't aiming for his head, I was just aiming for him. I just needed to make him stop. Stop looking at me with those dead eyes. Stop reaching for that tool. Stop breathing my air. The impact was sickeningly solid. It wasn't the sharp crack you hear in films. It was a dense, wet thud. The sound of a heavy object hitting something soft but resilient. His head snapped to the side with the force of the blow. The empty, mechanical smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed look of pure, animal shock. For a split second, his eyes, those vacant camera lenses, actually registered something. Surprise. Pain. It was the first human expression I had seen on his face, and it was because I had just caved in the side of his skull with my work computer. He stumbled back a step, one hand flying up to his temple. He didn't fall. A man that size doesn't just fall. But he was off balance. His equilibrium was shot. The world had, for a precious second, tilted for him just as it had for me. And that was all the time I needed. My brain was still offline, but the animal part knew what to do next. Flight. I didn't try to hit him again. I didn't check to see how badly he was hurt. I lurched forward and shoved him with both hands, right in the center of his chest. He was solid like a brick wall, but a dazed, stumbling brick wall. He staggered backward, his heels catching on the threshold of the elevator. He didn't fall out, but he was out of my way. The opening was there, a rectangle of flickering, hellish light and dusty air. It wasn't an escape to safety. It was an escape into another kind of nightmare, but at least it was a bigger one. A nightmare with room to run. I bolted. I launched myself out of that steel coffin and into the raw, unfinished hallway of the 13th floor. My feet hit the gritty concrete and I didn't dare look back. I just ran. I ran like I was on fire, like the devil himself was at my heels, which, for all I knew, he was. The air was thick and tasted of chalk and damp rot. It was cold, a deep, cellar-like cold that had nothing to do with air conditioning. Behind me, I heard a sound that was far worse than a monster's roar. It was a low, guttural string of curses. A human sound, an angry human sound. The stunned confusion was over. He was mad, you little. I didn't hear the rest. My own blood was pounding a frantic drumbeat in my ears, and my ragged, panicked gasps were louder than anything else. I fumbled in my pocket, my hand shaking so violently I could barely close it around my phone. I wrenched it out, my thumb mashing the side button over and over until the screen flared to life. The hallway was just as I'd first seen it, but now I was in it. A long, dark tunnel of raw concrete and exposed wiring. My phone's screen cast a pathetic, weak pool of bluish light a few feet in front of me, just enough to show the debris-strewn floor and the looming, featureless walls. I ran, dodging piles of discarded drywall and phantom coils of cable that snaked across the floor. Which way? Left? Right? It was a straight shot. There were no turns, just a long, dark corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. Then I heard the sound. It was a soft, almost polite electronic ting. My heart seized in my chest. I knew that sound. I heard it 10 times a day. It was the sound of an elevator reaching a floor. My floor, or, in this case, his floor. It was followed by the low hum and the metallic clatter of the doors starting to close. A cold dread, colder than the air in this forgotten place, washed over me. He wasn't running after me. He didn't have to. He was in the elevator. He was going to use the machine to hunt me. He could go down to the lobby. He could go up to my apartment. He could be waiting for me wherever I came out, if I ever came out. Or, he could be coming back. The thought made me push harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. My body, conditioned by years of sitting at a desk, was already failing me. I had to find a way out. A stairwell. There had to be a stairwell. Fire codes. Every floor has to have an emergency exit. And then I saw it. At the far end of the hall, barely visible in the gloom beyond my phone's glow, was a dark, rectangular shape. A door, a solid, metal fire door with a push bar across the middle. Hope surged through me, so powerful it was almost painful. I put on a final burst of speed, my feet slipping on the fine layer of dust. I was maybe 20 feet away when I heard the second ting. He had come back. The sound echoed in the long concrete hall, sharp and clear and full of menace. The elevator doors were opening behind me again. I could hear the faint whir of the motor. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Looking back would mean losing a precious second, and I didn't have one to spare. I slammed into the fire door with my full body weight. My shoulder exploded in pain as it hit the cold, unyielding steel. The push bar didn't budge. My hand, slick with sweat, fumbled for it, and I shoved. Nothing. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. A fire exit on a sealed-off floor. It was probably rusted shut. No, 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 I whimpered, the words coming out in choked sobs. Behind me, a new sound. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, unhurried. The scrape of work boots on concrete. He wasn't running. He was walking. He knew I had nowhere to go. The hunter, enjoying the final moments of the chase. Panic gave way to a kind of frenzied, primal rage. I wasn't going to die here. Not in this dusty, forgotten tomb. Not at the hands of some thing in a maintenance uniform. I backed up a few steps, my eyes locked on the impassive metal door. I ignored the screaming pain in my shoulder. I ignored the approaching footsteps. I lowered my good shoulder, took a deep breath that tasted like a tomb, and charged. The first impact was jarring. A shockwave went up my arm and into my teeth. The door groaned in protest, a screech of tortured metal, but it held firm. I did it again. This time, I put a raw, desperate roar behind it. The sound echoed off the walls, mixing with the sound of his slow, steady approach. The door gave a little more, a loud pop as one of the bolts in the frame surely surrendered. It moved. It wasn't much, just a fraction of an inch, but it moved. The footsteps behind me stopped. The silence was, impossibly, worse. I could feel his eyes on my back. I could feel that empty smile. I knew he was just standing there, watching me, maybe savoring the moment. Maybe he was reaching into his tool belt again. I didn't have time for another running start. I pressed my shoulder against the door, planted my feet on the gritty floor, and pushed with every ounce of strength I had left. I pushed with the memory of his dead eyes, with the smell of that awful bag, with the terror of that silent, stinking elevator car. My muscles screamed, my vision started to swim with black spots. The whole world narrowed down to the pressure on my shoulder and the unyielding steel. "Come on," I grunted through clenched teeth. "Come on," and just as I felt my strength completely give out, as my legs began to buckle, I heard it. Close, way too close. Ting, the elevator. He'd gone back to the elevator. He was leaving, or going somewhere else to wait for me. I didn't know which was worse. The sound, that final, crisp electronic bell of doom, was the last straw. A final, explosive surge of adrenaline shot through me. With a guttural yell that tore at my throat, I gave one last, desperate shove. There was a deafening shriek of tearing metal, a loud bang like a gunshot, and the world fell away from me. The door flew open, and I went with it, tumbling forward into darkness. I landed hard on a slick, painted surface, my momentum carrying me in a painful heap. Without thinking, I scrambled back, grabbing the edge of the heavy steel door I'd just broken through. I pulled it with all my might. It slammed shut with a deep, resonating boom that shook the very air around me, plunging me into absolute, total blackness. For a second, I just lay there in the pitch black, sprawled on a floor that felt cool and smooth under my cheek. The only sound was the phantom ringing in my ears and the deep, booming echo of the steel door I'd just slammed shut. The air tasted different here. It didn't taste like death and dust. It smelled faintly of latex paint and cleaning solution. It smelled normal. My fingers scrambled against the floor until they found my phone, the screen cracked but mercifully still alive. I flicked on the flashlight and the beam cut through the absolute darkness, revealing not a concrete tomb, but a standard-issue emergency stairwell. The walls were painted a sterile off-white. The steps were gray, with bright yellow safety strips on the edges. There was a clean, metal handrail. I could see the sign on the wall opposite me, a white number 12 in a black square. 12. I had fallen out of the 13th floor and into the 12th. Relief hit me so hard it felt like another physical blow. It was a hysterical, choking feeling that came out as a half laugh, half sob. I was out. I was safe. The thought barely had time to register before it was replaced by a new, colder one. He was still in the building. That thing was in the elevator. It could be on its way down to the lobby. It could be on its way up to my apartment on the 15th floor. That final, polite ting of the elevator bell echoed in my head, a sound that was no longer benign. It was the sound of the shark circling. I scrambled to my feet, my whole body a symphony of pain. My shoulder screamed, my ribs ached, and my legs felt like jelly. I didn't care. I just started running. Down. I half ran, half fell down the flights of stairs, my hand gripping the rail, my dress shoes slipping and sliding on the painted steps. The sound of my own panicked footsteps was a frantic, clumsy drumbeat in the enclosed space. 14 to 13, no, there was no 13. 14, 12, 11, 10. Each floor marker I passed was a small victory. I didn't slow down. I didn't dare. I could almost feel his presence behind me, a cold spot in the air, a shadow just waiting for me to stop. By the time I hit the ground floor, I was a wreck. I burst through the stairwell door into the lobby, and the warm, quiet elegance of the space felt like a different universe. Carlos, the night guard, was sitting at his desk, head down, looking at his phone. He looked up, startled, as I stumbled out, gasping for air. "Whoa, hey, man. You okay?" he asked, his expression shifting from boredom to mild concern. I couldn't form words. I just pointed a shaking finger back at the stairwell door, then jabbed it towards the bank of elevators. "Elevator," I gasped, my throat raw. 13th floor. "There's a guy," he tried to. Carlos frowned, standing up slowly. He was a big guy, but he moved with a kind of deliberate calm. 13th floor? Man, there is no 13th floor. You know that. He looked me over, taking in my disheveled suit, my wild eyes, the sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. "You have a little too much to drink tonight, Nom?" "No," I yelled, and the sound was so ragged it surprised even me. "No, I'm not drunk. Listen to me." The elevator, it stopped. The number 13 lit up. It opened. There was this maintenance guy. The story sounded insane even as I said it. I could see the disbelief hardening on Carlos's face, turning into that look people give you when they think you're having some kind of episode. Okay, calm down, he said, putting his hands up in a placating gesture. Let's call the building manager. And maybe the police. You stay right here. The next hour was one of the most surreal and frustrating of my life. The building manager, a perpetually flustered man named Henderson, arrived, looking like we'd woken him from a deep sleep. 2 police officers followed soon after. They were young and they had that tired, seen-it-all look that cops get late at night. I told them the story. I told it 3 times. Once to Carlos again, once to Henderson, and then the full, detailed version to the 2 officers, whose names were Miller and Davis. I told them about the elevator stopping, the button lighting up, the unfinished hallway, the smell, the man in the dirty uniform, the heavy bag. I told them how I'd hit him with my laptop bag. I even showed them the dented corner of the bag, and how I'd shoved him and run. I described breaking down the fire door. They listened with professional patience. When I was done, Officer Miller, the older of the 2, sighed. All right, sir, let's take a look. We all went to the elevators. I pointed to the one I'd been in. This one. Mr. Henderson produced a set of keys and opened the control panel. He fiddled with it, and the elevator doors slid open. It was empty. The floor was clean. The stainless steel walls reflected the lobby lights. There was no heavy bag in the corner. There was no damp stain on the carpet. Nothing. See? All normal, Henderson said with an air of nervous relief. Check the 13th floor, I insisted, my voice rising. He's there, or he was. Check the fire door I broke down. Sir, Officer Davis said, her tone firm but not unkind. As the building manager has stated, and as you can see on the panel, this building does not have a 13th floor. It's a common practice. Superstition. I'm telling you, it stopped there. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. My shoulder was throbbing, a deep, real pain. It was proof. It's a real place, a service level or something. You have to check. With a great deal of sighing and procedural reluctance, they agreed. They radioed for a technician. We all went up to the 12th floor. The officers, Henderson, and the tech used a special key and a crowbar to pry open the elevator shaft doors at the point where the 13th floor should have been. It took them 10 minutes of grunting and scraping metal. The doors groaned open to reveal nothing. Just the dark, greasy shaft. The counterweights. The thick cables hanging in the gloom. There was no unfinished hallway. There was no flickering light bulb. There was no landing at all. It was just an empty space between 12 and 14, a void filled with mechanics and wires. It's a utility pass-through, the tech said, wiping his hands on a rag. The plans call it a sealed interstitial space. No entry, no floor. They looked at me, all of them, Carlos, Henderson, the 2 cops. Their expressions were a mixture of pity and annoyance. In their eyes, my story had just crumbled into dust. I wasn't the victim of a terrifying attack. I was just a crazy person who was wasting their time. Sir, Officer Miller said, his voice now devoid of any warmth. Have you been under a lot of stress at work lately? Are you taking any medication? I just stood there, speechless. I looked down the dark, empty shaft. Then I looked at the pristine, painted wall of the 12th floor stairwell landing. I touched my shoulder, the pain sharp and undeniable. It happened. I knew it happened, but the evidence was gone. The entire world had conspired to tell me I was insane. They took a report, classifying it as a distress call, no incident found. Henderson nervously assured them it wouldn't happen again. They suggested I see a doctor. The next morning, I got a call from my boss had spoken with the building manager. They felt I needed to take a mandatory leave of absence. For stress. The days that followed were a waking fog. I stayed in my apartment, the one on the 15th floor, feeling like a prisoner. Every time I had to leave, I took the stairs. All 15 flights. I couldn't even look at the elevator. I replayed the events in my mind, over and over, until the edges started to blur. Was it a hallucination? A waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion? The physical world told me yes. The searing memory of that man's empty smile told me no. About a week later, I was sitting on my couch, endlessly scrolling through a local news website, doing anything to keep my mind from circling back to that night. And then I saw a headline. Police renew appeal for information on missing university student. I clicked on it out of idle curiosity. The article was about a young woman named Sarah Jenkins who had disappeared a month ago. A student at the city university. A bright kid, lots to live for, family was devastated. Standard, tragic stuff. I was about to click away when I saw the next paragraph. Ms. Jenkins was last seen entering her apartment building, the Willow Creek Residences, on the evening of October 12th. The Willow Creek Residences. That's where I lived. My blood went cold. I kept reading, my heart starting to pound in that sick, familiar way. Police today have released the final known image of Ms. Jenkins, taken from a security camera inside the building's elevator. The image loaded. It was grainy, black and white, a typical low-resolution security still. On the left was a young woman with long hair, smiling, probably looking at her phone. Sarah Jenkins. And on the right, standing next to her, was a man. He was wearing a maintenance uniform. His back was mostly to the camera, but I could see the familiar shape of the tool belt, the patch on the shoulder. My breath hitched in my throat. I leaned closer to the laptop screen, my face inches away. It was him. I knew it was him. And as I stared at that grainy, frozen moment from a month ago, a memory from my own night of terror slammed into my mind with the force of a physical impact. It wasn't just the man I remembered. It was the thing he was dragging. The long, heavy canvas bag that he'd pulled from the dark hallway. The way it scraped against the concrete, leaving that dark, wet trail. The sheer effort it took him to haul it. I had been so focused on him, on his dead eyes and the tool in his belt, that I hadn't properly processed what I was seeing. My brain, in its panic, had refused to put the pieces together. But now, in the quiet of my apartment, with the grainy photo staring back at me, the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. I finally understood the weight of the bag. I understood the dampness. I understood its awkward, lumpy dimensions. It had the shape of a person.